UFO whistleblower Jake Barber is shouting that the whole UFO truth, everything, is going to break free this year. Yeah, that's right. UFO disclosure is coming. However, there's a flaw in his optimism. No matter how sophisticated his team, his so-called League of Extraordinary Gentlemen may be, they're no match for the control mechanism employed by the phenomenon. This mechanism deliberately keeps us uncertain and divided about what's real. In essence, the phenomenon has been engineering this dynamic for decades. It's precisely why skeptics and believers have been locked in debate for so long with no resolution in sight. Definitive proof always remains just out of reach, allowing the debate over non-human intelligences to flourish, fueling further investigation, wonder, and that beautiful, healthy skepticism. Round and round we go in the pursuit of disclosure, always so close, yet never quite reaching the destination. Never underestimate the control mechanism of the phenomenon. It's always 2 steps ahead.
2 steps ahead. I am always 2 steps ahead.
Mr. Barber, you're just another cog in the wheel of this grand scenario the phenomenon has been orchestrating for decades. You should be proud because most of us never play such a crucial role in ensuring the control mechanism maintains its order. You and the fine folks at Skywatcher will give us hope, our opium, that will soon obtain smoking gun evidence of non-human intelligence. But in the end, you will fail, and we'll be right back to square one. Deception. Maybe I'm just being a big disclosure meanie. Maybe that's what this is. Maybe I'm just a disclosure jerk. But there's a bit of a problem. Skywatcher isn't the first effort to attempt to get smoking gun evidence of UFO intelligence. Oh, I don't know. How about NIDS? The National Institute for Discovery Science, founded in 1995 by real estate mogul Robert Bigelow? Does that ring a bell? It was disbanded in October of 2004. They tried for nearly a decade to capture smoking gun evidence and show the world that we're not alone. After all their efforts, they left with nada, nix, rien, nishevo, niente, ingeting, amitan, man. If I haven't yet convinced you, Skywatcher, to put an end to your operation, maybe, just maybe, the great George Knapp can get through to you in a way that I simply can't. George gave a really great talk on the wide spectrum paranormal activities and the research into that activity that was done at Skinwalker Ranch. Here are 2 clips from the McMenamin's UFO Fest 2018.
Whatever this thing was, this intelligence, it was a trickster. It played mind games. It was always 1 step ahead of everybody. It could anticipate what the rancher and his family and what the scientists who eventually came there were going to do next. You put up a camera in an area where there's been a lot of activity, there's nothing happens there anymore, it moves over here. And it just played mind games. They start seeing the same things, the balls of light, but it's always just out, it operates under its own rules. And it was always just outside of camera range. They had a lot of equipment malfunctions. Batteries would die, vehicles would die at the same points in the property. They'd have compasses that would just go crazy. There was a lot of really weird, measurable stuff.
2 steps ahead. I am always 2 steps ahead.
Yeah, it's going to come out. It's all coming out. It's coming out probably like this year. It's coming out probably like this year.
Now, pardon me for the theatrics. Of course, I want Skywatcher to succeed. Of course, I want them to prove everybody wrong. But if we're being honest, they are the underdogs. Plain and simple. The phenomenon has been here maybe for tens of thousands of years, but certainly since the 30s, 40s. And even though it might even exist in our oceans and have permanent residency there, and it's flying all around, it's abducting people, it's allowing itself to be seen every single day, sometimes completely unambiguous sightings, as Finn Hanley's YouTube channel, Finn365, demonstrates and has UFO literature demonstrates. And yet, we are still stuck in this scenario where we're debating each side, the skeptic versus the believer. So we had NIDS, who spent almost a decade at Skinwalker Ranch. It was funded. They had sophisticated equipment. And Skinwalker Ranch is still being studied. It's under the stewardship of billionaire Brandon Fugel. And once they took hold of it, Brandon, in 2016, they've been studying it all the way until today, 2025, and they haven't gotten any smoking gun evidence. And yet, if you go and look at these aerospace companies like Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, they've allegedly been recovering these craft. And so you have this disproportionate experience. For the common man, me, 8 billion of us, some of us may experience the phenomenon. We might see it. Some unfortunately get abducted, in my opinion. However, the phenomenon has operated for a very long time now to not want us civilians, us common people, to get that smoking gun evidence. But it's facilitated militaries, governments, and aerospace companies to get that smoking gun evidence. That's a problem. And I don't think that's a coincidence. That must be the objective of the phenomenon. They have implemented their activities in this very way that allowed this dynamic to exist and persist.
And what you're trying to do now is replicate in the private sphere what's being suppressed in the public sphere.
Yeah, we're not looking back. We can leave the bad actors of the past, we can leave them with their lies. We have no need for that. We're looking forward. I am absolutely confident that we are capable of generating the type of high quality sensor data and photography and film evidence that everyone is wanting.
If they let you, Mr. Barber, if they let you.
What are they doing with the UFOs that land? Like, what do you think was done with the egg that you retrieved, for example?
First of all, I don't know, but I am taken somewhere to a secure facility, and it was either destroyed or hidden or buried because they have so many of them now that it's not interesting to them, or that it was researched with the utmost secrecy.
And herein lies the precise problem. Everyone recognized what UFO whistleblower firsthand Jake Barber said, and I quote, "They have so many of them now that it's not interesting to them now," referencing these egg-shaped non-human intelligence created objects, because there are so many of them landing in these test ranges or close to these test ranges, as I understand it, which creates this gigantic disparity between what the aerospace companies have, what world governments have. We're referencing the US government in particular, what militaries have, either directly or indirectly. And then you have 8 billion human beings who are literally in the dark. So there is a huge problem if Lockheed or Northrop Grumman or any other contracted aerospace company has so many of these eggs or other objects that were produced by higher non-human intelligence that it's not even that interesting to them anymore. And so what I would say to Skywatcher, that if that is true, then you best be able to get that disparity to go away, because if you fail in this mission, it only reveals one conclusion, that the phenomenon is not so much interested in informing the public about its existence. Because if it was, it would give us, it could give us even a small fraction of what it gives governments, militaries, and aerospace companies, and we would enter the new world.
I'm also confident that if we continue on the path with our government agencies, that we're going to get a craft, we're going to get material in hand. I know it's possible, it's just a matter of working out the logistics.
Now we're talking. And the reason for my sudden surge in enthusiasm is because it seems very likely to me that the phenomenon wants the government to be involved with disclosure. Now, I know that is going to strike a nerve with many people listening, but allow me to make my case. I think if we are really attempting to be intellectually honest, we have to give tremendous weight and consideration to the disparity between governments, militaries, and aerospace companies' level of evidence of the phenomenon and everybody else. If you are going to look into my eyes with a straight face and tell me that that's just a coincidence, then I'm going to tell you I don't follow. Maybe it's a coincidence, but probability does not dictate maybe. Probability dictates it's very likely not a coincidence, at least from my perception. And if that is the case, then it seems like the phenomenon wants governments to be involved in the disclosure process, which is so ironic because there are so many people in the field, this UFO anomaly field, that are very fond of saying we need to leave the government behind, we need to ignore the government. They just lied to us, so why even pay attention to what they're saying? And yet, that completely ignores the high probability scenario that it's the phenomenon itself that wants government involvement. It's obvious. Because, it's so obvious that you're missing it. Think about that. The truth is so self-evident and underneath your nose and in plain sight to the point that you're actually missing what is transparent, unambiguous, and unavoidable. Think about it. If the phenomenon wasn't intent on having governments involved in this shift, this process, it could have bypassed the government at any moment over the many decades it determined not to do so. Meanwhile, over all those very decades, governments, aerospace companies, militaries have reams and reams and reams of smoking gun evidence, whether it's gun camera footage, recovery of craft and materials, satellite imagery, satellite tracking of NHI craft. Now, I'm going to play a part of that clip again to emphasize what I was harping on.
I'm also confident that if we continue on the path with our government agencies.
So actually, Jake Barber has mentioned many times that he is operating in conjunction or with government agencies. Now, maybe part of why him and Skywatcher is doing that is because they actually want him to get the smoking gun evidence, because it would draw attention away from the legacy programs and the cover-up and put renewed eyes on the phenomenon without focusing on cover-ups and lies by the U.S. government. It would diffuse that to some extent. But that's a little bit of a side point. Now, some people will say, which I think is a lower level interpretation, just in my opinion, they will say, no, you don't understand. The reason Jake Barber is involved with the U.S. government is because the U.S. government wants to continue to control the narrative. But I would retort and say that is missing the point. In fact, I'm sure they want to influence the narrative. But if you keep focusing on that, you're going to miss the much bigger point, the much bigger revelation that UFO history potentially proves 1,000,000 times over. Because let's not treat the phenomenon as this blob that has no will or desire. It just kind of exists in the ether. No, it is intelligent. It is intentional. And I think is probably the architects of the secrecy. So when you see it through that lens, instead of this amorphous blob that just you can't make heads or tails of, then it's clear that for whatever reason, and I don't know, you'd have to ask the phenomenon, they don't want this shift to happen outside of the government. And what I told you, the evidence for that is so supremely obvious. It is underneath your nose. It is transparent. It is unambiguous. It is unavoidable. It is so obvious, in fact, that most of the UFO community has either missed it or they don't think about it sufficiently. Again, if there's such a big disparity between who has the evidence and who doesn't, is that not an artificial construct? Are you really going to look into my eyes with a straight face and tell me, A, that's an artificial construct, B, it's a coincidence? Really? Because I don't think it is. And I'm going to push back against that. I think the phenomenon has operated in a way that's like a fine-tuning. It wants to be known, but it also wants to be debated. But that dynamic does not exist within aerospace companies, governments, and militaries amongst those in the know. And that is not a coincidence, in my opinion. And yet people want to say the government means nothing. And maybe they're right. Maybe the government means nothing. Maybe they're right. Maybe the government is trying to control the narrative. But again, that's a minor revelation compared to what's underneath our nose, that the phenomenon wants the shift to happen with the government involved, not with them uninvolved. Because if the phenomenon truly wanted the shift, the revelation, the disclosure to happen without the government, they could just do it themselves. It's in plain sight.
And so, how did the object come to land?
I think it was invited to land by the psionics team.
Is that always how they make the objects land?
No, there's a number of other ways. So I have to tell you that weapon systems are tested out there.
I know this from other sources. I know that high pulse microwave weapons are being used to bring down some of these craft.
Yes.
Now, how often was it done where the objects would land on their own accord, and how often was it done that weapons would be used?
Yeah, I can't tell you how often. I can tell you they are brought down both ways, that they are invited to land by the psionics team. Other times they are invited in by the psionics team, but then HPMs, which are high-powered microwave weapons, are deployed, and they have an effect where they can disrupt the flight pattern of the object, and when it is an object, sometimes it's not, and it can result in that aircraft being forcibly brought down.
Now, Ross Coulthart asked, how often was it that the objects would land on their own accord, and how often were weapons used? He couldn't answer that question. However, that question is utterly irrelevant, and you'll understand why that is after I play the following clip.
The implication of what you're saying is that this intelligence that's behind these objects, whatever it is, seems willing to share.
Yeah, I think it ultimately is working for us. And it is commonly talked about that what we are getting, even when we weaponize it, is a donation. A gift. And even when we deploy equipment, when there's a combined operation with a psionics team and a machine-based team, all the equipment kind of has to be blessed and brought in when it's a psionically led operation for summoning.
So Jake Barber said, what we are getting, even when we are weaponizing it, is a gift. That is absolutely crucial for you to pay attention to. It doesn't matter that they're weaponizing it. It's part of the dance, right? If we are to take this accurately, because I wasn't there, but let's just assume Jake Barber is telling it like it is, then the phenomenon probably could care less that they're using microwaves to help bring these craft down when they can. And other times, they're just landing on their own accord without microwaves being utilized at all. I don't think the phenomenon really cares. I really doubt that the phenomenon sees the microwaves as violence, because whether the craft are landing on their own accord without microwave technology, or the psionic team is summoning them, but there's also microwave technology being used, either one of these scenarios, it seems like it's a donation regardless. I mean, I am taking some liberty here because I haven't called the phenomenon up with my phone. But I also think it's probably a fair assumption that it doesn't have to do this dance. It doesn't have to land in these ranges that are controlled by aerospace companies or close to these ranges. Again, the disparity between what the militaries, the governments, and the aerospace companies have in terms of evidence and knowing that the phenomenon exists on a scientific, epistemological level is light years from what the rest of us 8 billion people know. They don't debate it. They have the gun camera footage. They have the craft. They have the materials. They track them allegedly through radar and satellite coming in and out of the ocean. And the rest of us are nowhere near that, and we're debating whether it exists at all. I don't think that's a coincidence. And here's the thing. Let's say Jake Barber is a complete liar, and he is working on behest of the U.S. government to control the narrative. This still would not be a challenge for my hypothesis, in my opinion. Because, and it's very simple why, so listen very carefully. Because at this stage in the process since Roswell, or Magenta, Italy, 1933, I think, although I recall that when David Grush was speaking with Joe Rogan, he couldn't say it, but he strongly implied that there were even crashes before that. And yet, if that's the case, why have all these crashes been recovered by governments or aerospace and not by the public before they could get their paws on it, right? It's just coincidence after coincidence after coincidence. And it's just this big coincidence that there's this disparity. I don't think so. And I'm going to push back against that because I'm not saying it's impossible, but we have to give weight to the idea that this is a artificial construct implemented by the phenomenon itself because it's engaging in social engineering. But getting back to my original point, that even if Jake Barber is a disinformation agent, it doesn't challenge my hypothesis. Not at this stage, because even if we were to get disclosure through a mass sighting, the social engineering would have already been long infiltrated into the zeitgeist. Because what's everyone going to say? Everyone's going to say, oh, the government's lied to us. They lied to us about the second biggest mystery that humanity has. The first mystery that is rated number one, that we want to know the most, is does consciousness survive death? The second biggest mystery that we want to have an answer to is, are we alone? So even if there was a mass sighting over the Macy Day parade, my hypothesis would not be challenged because the social engineering has already been instituted. Disclosure is going to cause a problem, a serious problem between governments and civilization. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think governments were baited into the cover-up. And so it does make a lot of sense that non-human intelligence will want governments to play a role in the disclosure process. But even if governments don't play a direct role in UFO confirmation itself, it doesn't challenge my hypothesis because my hypothesis is based upon intentional social engineering. So that when disclosure finally comes, it elicits a very specific outcome based upon the disparity implemented by the phenomenon in terms of who has the evidence and who doesn't. Either way, one of the reasons I have a little bit of confidence that Jake Barber and Skywatcher might actually get the goodies is because they are partnering up with government entities. And it does seem that the phenomenon in its implementation of social engineering likes that.
A lot of people watching this, Jake, are going, I'm sure, this is crazy. This guy's making this up. This can't possibly be true. Yeah. Alien vehicles, psychic techniques to engage with technology. This is disinformation, fabrication.
Yeah. Well, we intend to prove that's not the case, which has a lot to do with the timing as to why I'm coming out now. We plan to produce that evidence in our new venture with our teams that we've used for years. In the legacy program, we've now gotten out and we've pooled our resources and we're backed by venture capital. We're also working in coordination with the most forefront government agencies that you would want involved with us on this subject matter. And we're going to start producing evidence on all of this and we're going to share it with.
But crucially, you know it.
This is the thing that everyone misses who thinks the government is totally unimportant in this conversation. They fail to see that this is all about a shift. It's about a jump in human understanding, maybe even consciousness in some sense. They fail to see that there's a strong likelihood that this whole thing is being engineered by the phenomenon itself. They want to influence us. And that disclosure itself may play a huge role in that influence. And at this point, there has to be disclosure. Like I said, even if the phenomenon, there was going to be 10 giant black triangles the size of a football field over the Macy Day parade, we would still have a disclosure that is not really organic. Disclosure really can't be organic anymore because the government has been involved for so long in lying about the topic. There is going to be no purely grassroots disclosure. The phenomenon itself has engineered the dynamic so that that's not even possible anymore. Because if we were to have a mass sighting, and some would refer to that as catastrophic disclosure, it would still draw the government into the equation. The only way we could have truly bypassed the government is if the phenomenon would have showed itself many decades ago, prior to any cover-up, and revealed itself publicly without facilitating or allowing governments to cover it up. So let me be extremely clear about that. There is going to be no grassroots disclosure. There is going to be no organic disclosure because the phenomenon has already, in my opinion, intentionally social engineered the dynamic. So that is an utter impossibility. Period. Point blank. And I'm willing to debate anybody on that because it's so clear to me that that's a very likely scenario, and it's so obvious and right underneath our noses. So I got a little sidetracked, although I think my response was relevant to the previous clip, but let me have a direct analysis of the previous clip. Jake Barber said basically that he's recruited people onto his current team that worked for the legacy program, and somewhere else he said either worked or were associated. So the people in Skywatcher, at least some of them were part of the legacy program in one way or another. He also said that Skywatcher is backed by venture capital funding and that it is coordinating with the most forefront government agencies you'd want involved. So if Skywatcher brings disclosure, and Jake Barber basically becomes Neo because he would. He will have succeeded where everyone else has failed. He will have succeeded where NIDS failed, where Brandon Fugel failed, in the sense that they did not bring smoking gun evidence to the table. Not in the sense that they did not learn more about the phenomena and that they were not very productive in that regard. But if Jake Barber succeeds in bringing disclosure, well, the U.S. government has its tentacles on that. Not necessarily in a nefarious way, but again, Jake Barber said that Skywatcher is working in coordination with the most forefront government agencies you'd want involved. And just to clarify a little bit regarding what I said earlier, when I said there's going to be no grassroots disclosure, what I mean by that is that the governments of the world will be involved. And now let me create a very simple explanation. Even if disclosure comes from Jake Barber, which wouldn't be entirely grassroots, he's working with government agencies. But even if we were to get disclosure with 10 triangles, each of them the size of a football field, over the Macy Day Parade, then the governments of the world would be forced to reveal whether they knew about this phenomenon or not. Because at that point, citizens of every country would demand them to answer. And if that were to happen, then can we really say that disclosure was a grassroots effort? We might be able to say it had more elements of a grassroots effort versus one day waking up in the morning and having the president live televised and tell everyone about UFOs, but we will still never truly have a grassroots independent disclosure or confirmation. That ship has long sailed based upon social engineering that the phenomenon has implemented, in my opinion. Now I'm going to play another clip, and some of you may have had this clip in mind thinking, oh, you need to look back at that part of the interview because that would diminish your argument, Ryan. But in actuality, I don't think it diminishes my argument. Let's play it.
The NHI does not respect the monopoly the U.S. government thinks it has on this subject. And there are organizations worldwide that understand that that it's a worthwhile investment. They're not waiting on offices like Arrow or the President of the United States to tell them they should spend time and money on this. It's being done. And there are global crash recovery and reverse engineering programs outside the U.S. And I'm not referring to just governments. I'm referring to hybrid organizations that are extra governmental.
To me, it's not about whether the phenomenon or non-human intelligence, however you want to refer to it, respects the monopoly the U.S. government thinks it has on the subject. It's all about the control mechanism. So if there are indeed organizations worldwide that understand investigating non-human intelligence is a worthwhile investment, and that they're not waiting on offices like Arrow or the President of the United States to tell them that they should spend money on it, and that there's also global crash recovery and reverse engineering programs outside the U.S., and that they're not even just from governments, that there are hybrid organizations that are extra governmental that are doing this. This does not contradict my emphatic call to awareness of the control mechanism. It's all about the control mechanism. It's all about the disparity regarding where the evidence is and where the evidence is not, and the very obvious conclusion that it's likely such a disparity because that's the way the phenomenon wants it. They're implementing social engineering. We just got ChatGPT 4.5 today, all right? Maybe these species, whatever they are, have ChatGPT 89 trillion. And they can game plan us in ways we don't even understand. And in fact, I've discussed with a friend of mine that it's weird that some skeptics don't see the potential of how much higher intelligence could manipulate and game plan our civilization when you get a glimpse of ChatGPT. It's very suggestive of game planning and incredible levels of awareness and the instruction that these civilizations would have through artificial intelligence to influence the human species precisely as they want. I mean, they may have long reached the singularity. So it's not about the monopoly the U.S. government thinks it has. It's about the control mechanism. It's the control mechanism, stupid. How's that for a mantra? And so I know I'm repeating myself a lot, but like it's all about the disparity that reeks of an artificial construct that is not the result of a coincidence. So regardless of how disclosure happens, it may feel random. It may seem random or even organic in some ways, but it might actually be the very architecture that the phenomenon laid down, and we're just falling into it. And from our perception, it seems random and coincidental because we don't grasp the level of technology and capabilities that they have. And I would argue that the more advanced the civilization becomes, the less they rely on randomness, the more they want to control everything. From their own genetic makeup, genetically engineering themselves, to engineering any civilizations they may be interacting with in terms of influencing them to get a very precise outcome. Not necessarily disrespecting our free will, but working with our free will.
Do you think the aliens, the non-human intelligence, wants us, humanity, to know about their existence?
Yeah, I do believe that. That's the message that we're getting.
So you felt that yourself when you connected?
Message. And there are others that I know of that are being sent that message directly, and they are extremely confident.
Well, there's only one way to interpret what Jake Barber just said. At least it could be argued. Simply because he would know as much as anybody else that there are elements within governments, militaries, aerospace companies that have known we're not alone for a very long time. So within the context of the question, do you think the non-human intelligence wants us to know they exist? He must be referencing humanity as a whole, not just the people who've already known for decades on a scientific epistemological level. I hope he's right. I would love if Skywatcher got that smoking gun piece of evidence and basically Jake Barber would become UFO Neo. Fantastic. And Skywatcher would become world famous. Fantastic. I don't know how we're going to get disclosure, but I do think it's an inevitability, even if it's so easy to be pessimistic. It's so easy to say it's too good to be true, but I mean, I think it's very clear the phenomenon's here. It's real. The cover-up's real too, by the way. And the cover-up does not exist independent of the phenomenon. They are, in my opinion, they are interlinked because the phenomenon has been doing social engineering to create a disparity between who it wants to have evidence that it exists in terms of scientific epistemology and who it doesn't want. And for the longest time, it's been governments, it's been aerospace companies, it's been militaries, whether it's gun camera footage, whether it's satellite imagery, craft, bodies recovered. In my assessment, that is not a coincidence. That is intentional. And I've already explained to you why I think this is likely the case. I'm sure it's more complicated than my explanation, but it's likely social engineering to influence civilization. So I'm going to be watching Skywatcher very closely, and I hope the phenomenon allows itself to be documented. Because the phenomenon allows aerospace companies to document it. The phenomenon allows militaries to document it. The phenomenon allows governments to document it. And whatever organizations it allows. But the phenomenon has not yet facilitated 8 billion of us coming into the fold on a scientific epistemological level. And when that happens, that will be the shift. That will be the new world. And it really is that simple. And with that, we're going to leave it at that. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, you could become a YouTube member. You could become a patron. You could give me a one-time donation. All those potentialities can be accessed in the description box below. Or you can just slap a like on this bad boy and I'll appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Special thanks to all YouTube members, patrons, those that have bought merch, those that have given me a one-time donation. I couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode.